The wall clock showed 9:30 when the double glass doors opened with a sharp snap. The sound crossed the floor like a warning. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Fingers froze above keyboards. Laughter died halfway in throats. It was always like this when he arrived. The air shifted as if someone had shut an invisible window. The wealthy boss walked down the hall with slow, steady steps, the leather of his shoes softly creaking on the shiny floor. The dark grey suit looked like it had been shaped right on his body. The watch on his wrist gleamed as if it had its own light. Around him, the office breathed luxury. Glass everywhere, brushed steel, pricey minimalist paintings no one could explain. An indoor garden with white stones and a perfectly trimmed tree locked inside a glass cube. Everything there had one single purpose: remind everyone who was in charge. He stopped at the center of the room, where desks lined up like soldiers. His gaze passed over each face, one by one, with a smirk that never touched his eyes. He straightened his tie, opened a half-smile of someone enjoying their own power. Good morning, to those who deserve it. A nervous laugh here and there. The snap of a pen breaking under pressure. A sigh. The hum of the air conditioner, faithful like a clock, kept the room alive. He dropped a folder on the central desk. Not just a drop. A calculated noise, like a gavel announcing judgment. He opened it with theatrical care and pulled out a stack of bound papers. The plastic covers shined under the lights. Some exchanged glances. Others stared at their screens, pretending it had nothing to do with them. "We've got a new document," he said, pausing like someone measuring a leap. "Important, confidential, strategic, and as you can see, it isn't exactly in our language." He flipped the first page, revealing heavy lines, long paragraphs, signs, dancing between the familiar and the strange. He raised his eyebrows, pleased with the little shivers he spread. "Let's play a game," he went on, with the lightness of someone serving poisoned dessert. "A small challenge to brighten the morning. Whoever translates this entire document precisely gets my paycheck this month." The words seemed to bounce off the ceiling and back. A held-in "ah," a muffled "what?" The involuntary clink of a glass against a desk. His salary was corridor legend, big enough to spark talk at family parties, distant enough to sound like a joke. "Any volunteers?" he asked, arms wide like a conductor. "Or shall we keep pretending this is a serious place while running from the first real hurdle?" One of the secretaries raised her hand carefully, as if the hand itself was guilty. Her eyes were tired, but a quiet dignity still held its ground. I can try." "Great. Try." He handed over the stack like a trophy he knew wouldn't be lifted. She ran through the lines, tilted her head a bit, bit her lip, started again, once more. The silence grew deep enough to reveal tiny sounds. The distant click of the elevator, the buzz of a sleeping printer, the held breath of those hoping she'd succeed. "It's not English," she whispered, without daring to face him. "Not Spanish either." "What an extraordinary discovery." The boss smiled, though his eyes said obvious. "Anyone else?" A rushed assistant shot up his hand, the type who collected certificates like travel mugs. He grabbed the file, opened halfway, hunted for familiar words like a lighthouse in fog. "Italian? Polish? Hungarian? No." His voice shrank. "I guess. I don't know." "Natural," the boss replied, fake comfort dripping. "Not everyone was born to sail rough seas." Someone at the back let out a short chuckle. Another lowered his head in shame. A third typed nonsense just to seem busy. The whole room suddenly felt smaller. That was when life's invisible camera moved to the corner. There, behind a desk with plastic plants, someone swept slowly. The cleaning lady. Simple clothes, hair tied in a bun that threatened to fall all day. Glasses slipping down her nose. Thin gloves that already knew the shape of desks, the map of dust, and the secrets of baseboards. She worked with almost sacred focus, like she knew cleaning also meant giving the place back its dignity. No one really looked at her. Or rather, they looked, but didn't see. And yet she saw it all. The jokes, the silences, the tiny expressions, The pride, the masks that fell whenever the boss walked past. Life had taught her to watch before acting. The boss turned another page, like a magician setting up a trick. Maybe I'm asking too much. Maybe I expect this place to do more than just drag slides to the trash at 6 sharp. He gave a smirk. Who knows? Maybe someone out there has a hidden gift, right? No one moved. The air felt stuck. The clock started to matter again. Ah, of course not. He answered his own sarcasm. Hidden gifts are rare, and when they exist, they usually stay very well hidden. His eyes, restless, searched the room for a new target, and by an irony close to cruelty, they landed on the cleaner. The glint of a hunter of humiliations settled in his stare. You, he said, pointing with his chin, like summoning an object. Found any word there in your dust map? Some swallowed hard. Others held back a laugh. The broom stopped. The cleaner lifted her face slowly, careful like someone who knows certain moves make too much noise. She looked at the boss without fear or challenge, just steady. I'm working, she replied, plain. We all are in theory. He opened a smile that showed teeth and disdain. But some work with the head, others with the broom. And today it seems not even the head helps. Tell me, want to try your luck? Silence. Then a murmur of chairs. It was like the whole building leaned in to listen. The cleaner pushed her glasses back in place, fixed the strap of the bag where she kept cloths and a spray bottle, and stepped forward twice. Not dramatic, just natural, like answering a call that couldn't be ignored. If you'd like, she said, with the softness of someone apologizing for existing, I can take a look. The boss laughed, short, pleased with his own trap. That would be historic. Imagine, the cleaning lady translating what my analysts can't. He turned to the room. Anyone betting? An intern who gathered courage in silence raised his hand. If she wants to try, why not? Because the real-world kid charges results, the boss cut without even looking. And I don't give my paycheck for a circus act. I want accuracy. I want skill. I want level. The cleaner stood still, weighing the weight of the moment. The hall fit into the gap between two breaths. No one moved a finger. Some hoped she'd step back because it would hurt less. Others hoped she'd go on because they were tired already. She stretched out her hand. The gesture was small, but it moved tectonic plates. May I see the file? The boss held the binding for a second, enough to remind everyone who had the power to yield. Then he handed it over. Not with respect, but with the guilty pleasure of someone who feels generous in cruelty. The paper had a fine texture, the kind fingertips remember. The cleaner scanned the first page, then the second. The characters lined up like part of a tune already heard. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just read. Beside her, the secretary who had tried first drew a deep breath, as if trying to lend courage. The studious assistant squeezed his pen until the tip squeaked. A manager slid his chair back a fraction, ready to jump in if a disaster came. Well, the boss asked, the very thing everyone wanted and feared at once. Recognize anything besides the dust you sweep? She lifted her eyes, no anger in them, just calm. A calm that unsettles because it doesn't ask permission. I recognize plenty, she said simply. A small jolt went through the room. The boss tilted his head like amused by an unexpected improvisation. Oh, really? Maybe you're mixing letters with numbers. It happens, especially when you don't. He waved vaguely, as if defining study as luxury, when you don't have the habit of opening books. The cleaner turned back to the first page, scanned the heading, touched a footnote lightly, like checking the time on a watch. Time seemed to take shape. She breathed, and that simple act was noticed by everyone. A deep breath, the kind that comes before choices that bend the course of days. If you'd like, she spoke, clear, I can start with the introduction. Then I'll explain the terms that are technical. The word technical hit the ground. The ground echoed back. A few eyes widened. The boss stepped forward, trying to shrink her world to the space between his eyebrows. You're telling me you know what you're talking about? I'm saying I can translate, she replied, with the same calm used to pour coffee without spilling. He twisted his wrist, showed the watch like flashing power without saying power. Very well. He clapped once, slicing the air. Quiet, please. Let's hear from our guest. If it's good, we learn. If it's bad, at least we laugh. Silence rushed in. The air conditioner hummed steady. The world held its breath. The cleaner placed her finger where the first paragraph began. The paper gave a faint sound, a shh, almost human, like asking for quiet. She parted her lips. "Before I begin," she said, eyes on the boss with respect and firmness, "do you keep your word?" He let out a short laugh. "My word is worth more than many contracts you all sign without reading. Translate, and you get my paycheck this month." She nodded. Not like begging blessing, but like sealing an agreement she would charge. And then, before the first translation touched the air, something shifted inside people. The secretary set her hands on her lap to stop trembling. The assistant straightened his back. The intern smiled, small, like watching the birth of a story to tell someday. The manager loosened his tie half a centimeter to breathe. The cleaner drew another breath. The hall fit between two heartbeats. The words were ready, lined up, exact, waiting to leave. She opened her mouth, and the boss, without meaning to, leaned forward. For the first time that morning he waited. The translation was a whisper away, fate, hanging by a breath. The cleaner's mouth opened, but before the first word could take shape, the boss raised his hand with that commanding gesture that ruled the air without touching a thing. "One moment," his voice sliced through the tension like scissors. "Before you dare to toy with my time, I want everyone here to grasp what's at stake." He held the file up high, like a war trophy. The lamp's reflection danced on the pages. "This text isn't some nonsense. It's not a cake recipe, not a phone manual. It's a strategic report sent by a partner firm that charges per hour more than some of you earn in a whole month. If we translate it wrong, we could lose million-dollar contracts. So please, don't mistake courage for skill." Those words fell like hammer blows. Many swallowed hard. The cleaner, however, never looked away. The boss slammed the binding down on the table. "The challenge stands. Whoever translates it gets my paycheck. But understand, there's no mercy here. If you fail, you'll be remembered forever as the fools who tried." The room hushed again. A secretary whispered to another, "He's exaggerating." "He always does," her colleague answered, eyes fixed on the floor. One of the marketing analysts, trying to hide his nerves, let out a short chuckle. "This'll be funny," he muttered. The cleaner taking the risk. The boss heard. He always did. "Funny?" he repeated, loud enough for all. "Then let's laugh together." He turned back to the cleaner. "Go on then. Tell us what it says." She drew a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, and began. Chapter 1. Initial Guidelines for Resource Integration. The hall held its breath. For the first time, someone spoke words that sounded real. "This document aims to guide cooperation between sectors from different countries, respecting global trade rules and social responsibility practices." An intern blinked hard, nearly dropping his pen. She's really translating." The boss narrowed his eyes. "Keep going." The cleaner's voice didn't shake. It was clear, paced, like she understood before she spoke. "Cooperation must be set up transparently, with monthly reports and independent oversight." Absolute silence. Even the hum of the servers seemed to vanish. The boss couldn't stand silence when it wasn't his. He gave a thin laugh. "Interesting. Very interesting. You must have memorized this somewhere, right? Maybe found a translated version online." The cleaner set the paper down gently. "If you'd like, I can translate another section. Pick any page." He hadn't expected that firmness. He yanked the stack back, flipped through quickly, and opened to a section packed with technical terms, graphs, and footnotes. He tossed it on the table before her. "Translate this." She leaned in, scanned the paragraphs, and spoke. "The rollout of protocols must take into account local logistics, respecting transport and customs laws." She looked at him, steady. "Failure to observe such rules may lead to severe penalties, including suspension of trade licenses." A collective sigh swept the room. The secretary, who hadn't managed to translate anything earlier, put a hand over her mouth. The doubtful analyst's eyes went wide. Even the cynics felt their skin prickle. With every line, the balance shifted. The weight once owned by the boss slowly slid into her hands. He noticed and couldn't hold it in. Don't get carried away. Translating a handful of lines proves nothing. What guarantees you know the whole report? She calmly turned 2 more pages, pointed to a passage, and translated softly, like reciting a prayer. All data must be stored in compliance with international information protection standards, ensuring end-to-end encryption. The intern muttered, "That's flawless." The boss huffed, trying to seize back control. "Fine, we've seen enough of your display." But the cleaner kept going. The signatory countries agreed to maintain transaction confidentiality under penalty of fines and immediate removal from the program. The staff began trading glances. The air had shifted. The boss's wall of arrogance now showed cracks. He felt it. Sweat gathered at his neck, hidden by the shirt collar. "Enough," he said, raising his hand again. "That's enough." The cleaner closed the file. "You asked. I only answered." The shock had landed. The turning point was undeniable. The invisible woman who swept forgotten corners had just shown she knew more than all of them together. The boss drew a long breath, trying to rebuild his mask, forced a smile. "Well then, this isn't over. I want to see how far this boldness goes." He turned to the others. "Learn from this. Sometimes silence hides the absurd, but sometimes it hides cheap tricks." The cleaner didn't reply. She only adjusted her glasses again and looked back at the file, calm, like she knew this was only the beginning. And everyone there felt it. Without a word, the war had been declared. That hall, once ruled by the boss's laughter, now seemed frozen in time. The echo of the cleaner's last lines still hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. People didn't know whether to breathe with relief because she had done well, or hold their breath, waiting for the blast that could come at any second. The boss paced from side to side. The shine of his watch flashed with each move of his arm. But for the first time it wasn't showing off wealth. It was showing the nerves he couldn't hide. The metal seemed to gleam too much, as if it tried to cover for his stare, which was no longer the same. He drew a deep breath, clapping his hands together like someone trying to bring back rhythm to a show that had spun out of control. "Very well," he said, voice steady, though missing its usual bite. "We've had enough morning drama. That's it. Now all of you get back to work." No one moved. The sound of typing didn't return. No chairs creaked. Everyone stayed frozen, like spectators waiting for a play that hadn't reached its peak. The cleaner didn't move either. The file was still in her hands. Her fingers held it firm without a single tremor. She carried it as naturally as if it were a recipe notebook she knew by heart. "Sir," she said, calm, "that wasn't drama. You made a promise." That word landed like thunder. Promise. A demand few would dare to make in front of him. The boss stopped pacing, turned slowly, and fixed his eyes on her. "Promise?" he repeated, almost laughing. "I said whoever translated the whole document would get my paycheck. You didn't finish it." She held his gaze. "Then let me finish." The air thickened. Some swallowed hard. Others leaned forward slightly, eager for what was next. An analyst with glasses whispered to his co-worker, "She's not afraid at all, or she's lost everything already," the other replied, never taking his eyes off her. The boss walked to the main desk, leaned against it, arms crossed, trying to hold his pose of authority. But the stiffness in his shoulders showed he was unsettled. "You really think you can stand against me?" he asked, voice dropping low, almost a hiss. She breathed in. "I'm not standing against you. I'm just doing what you asked." That plain answer cut through his act. The whole floor noticed it. The intern, who had barely dared speak, muttered softly, "It's happening." The boss narrowed his eyes. He needed to take back control. He had to mock her before she went too far. He grabbed the stack of papers again, raised it high, and said, "Fine. You want to go on? Go on. But know this, if you stumble, if you miss even one word, you'll carry that shame forever." He tossed the file into her hands. "Let's see how far this bluff goes." The cleaner didn't hesitate. She opened to a random page, full of technical terms and footnotes, scanned it quickly and began, "The restructuring of the sector must follow the clauses set in the 2015 agreement, taking into account inflation adjustments and quarterly reviews." She paused, looked straight at him and added, "The lack of compliance reports may result in the suspension of tax benefits." The reaction was instant. A wave of shock filled the room. The secretary who had failed before covered her mouth. The mocking analyst was speechless. Even the skeptics exchanged stares, amazed. The boss let out a short, forced laugh. "Impressive, but translating loose paragraphs proves nothing. Translation isn't just swapping words. It's grasping context. It's skill. Do you even know what that means?" She lifted her chin, calm. "Then ask me questions." The challenge was blunt. That line flipped the scale. He wanted to ridicule her, but now he had to find a way to test her instead. He walked to the shelf, pulled an old folder thick with notes in different languages, opened to a page handwritten in French, full of economic terms. "Translate this." Now. She took the paper, read fast, lips moving silently, and replied, "Contracts must be renegotiated in local currency every 6 months to ensure stability against exchange fluctuations." The intern couldn't hold back. He smacked the desk. "That's perfect." Others agreed in murmurs. The air shifted. Respect was slipping out of the boss's grip and moving to her. He tried to gather himself, straightened his tie. "Very well. I see you have some talent, but it's not over." The cleaner handed the sheet back. "I'll finish the entire document, but I want everyone here to witness your word." Eyes met, and in that moment the boss realized the tide had turned. The room, once laughing at his jokes, now hung on her next line. He felt his mouth go dry, tried to smile, but it had no force. The audience wasn't his anymore. And there, the true turning point arrived. The cleaner, once invisible, was now the focus of every gaze. She was no longer just the one sweeping forgotten corners. She was the woman who, with calm and firmness, had made the most powerful man on the floor lose his grip. And everyone knew, from then on, nothing would be the same. The mood in the office was unrecognizable. Hours earlier, no one would even dare breathe louder in front of the boss. Now, though, everyone waited for the cleaner's next word like waiting for the next scene of a play that couldn't be stopped. And that was exactly why the boss felt cornered. He couldn't stand the thought of losing the spotlight. He needed to take control back. He pushed himself up from the desk with a sudden move, sending the chair crashing against the wall. The noise echoed through the room, breaking the silence like thunder. "You're impressed?" he said, voice raised, almost shouting. "Are you really buying that translating a handful of lines proves anything?" The analyst with glasses adjusted them quietly. The intern stepped back, swallowing hard. But the cleaner stayed standing, still, holding the file with ease. The boss stepped closer, his face just inches from hers. "You think you know more than everyone here? You think you can challenge me in my own office?" She didn't blink. "I'm not challenging you. I only accepted your offer." The steady reply, without raising her tone, sounded stronger than any yell. The employees exchanged looks. It was unheard of, someone standing firm against him without losing composure. But the boss wouldn't back down. He paced in circles, gesturing. "Don't fool yourselves. This is luck. Coincidence. Anyone with a dictionary could spit out a few lines. She's no translator, no analyst, nothing but a cleaner." A few laughed nervously, but the laughter died quick. No one wanted to be part of that attempt at humiliation. The cleaner drew in a breath, squared her shoulders and said, "You can keep trying to put me down, but I know what I studied." The boss froze. That line carried weight. A few eyes widened. The older secretary, who hardly ever spoke, whispered to herself, "She studied." The boss seized the moment to strike. "Studied? Where? At a real university?" "No, I bet you learned from cheap courses, maybe watching online videos." "That doesn't make you better than anyone here." His scorn rang out, but this time it didn't hit as before. The cleaner lowered her gaze for a second, as if recalling something. Then she lifted her head, her voice firm. I studied alone at night. While cleaning offices, I carried used books in my bag. I read on buses during lunch breaks, between jobs. I didn't have a teacher, but I had discipline. The confession made the room stir. Her honesty rang so true that faces around her softened. The boss tried to cut it off. Stories of hardship sound nice in movies. Here we're talking serious business. You might have memorized a few lines, but you're not fit to translate a full contract. She met his eyes. Then let me prove it. That plain sentence was like a key turning in everyone's mind. The boss's pushback now looked like childish stubbornness against her confidence. But he wasn't done. He turned to the staff and asked, "Do you believe her? Do you really think a woman who scrubs floors knows more than all of you with degrees?" Silence answered. No one dared speak up for her, but no one sided with him either. His isolation showed. The cleaner broke the silence. "You can call me a cleaner as many times as you like. That doesn't change what I know." Her words cut sharp. No arrogance, only conviction. The boss gave a dry laugh, clinging to his aura of superiority. "Fine. If you're as good as you claim, then translate this part here in front of everyone." He pulled another sheet, this time full of broken phrases, economic jargon, and tricky acronyms. He threw it on the table like a final trap. She picked it up, read calmly, and translated in a clear voice. "The annual variation indexes must be recalculated based on the average GDP of the last 5 years, with adjustments tied to floating exchange rates." Pause. The intern almost clapped, but held back. The room stayed silent, but disbelief marked every face. The boss, out of options, snorted. "Coincidence? You could have guessed." The secretary finally spoke up. "No one guesses that." It was the first time someone from the team dared to stand against him. The boss shot her a warning look, but it no longer carried weight. His authority was crumbling in front of everyone. He tried one last move. "All right then, keep going. But remember, if you miss even one line, I'll know you're nothing but a fraud." The cleaner adjusted her glasses. "I'm not afraid of mistakes. I'm only afraid of not trying." The line echoed in everyone's mind. The contrast was clear. On one side, a man with power but terrified of losing control. On the other, a simple woman, armed only with courage and knowledge, yet refusing to back down. And in that contrast, the scale tipped for good. The doubt he tried to throw at her no longer stuck. On the contrary, with each jab, with each harsh word, she seemed to grow larger. The employees, once submissive, now saw something new. A new, invisible hierarchy was taking shape before their eyes, and the boss knew. The more he fought, the weaker he looked. The whole room was thick with expectation. Every word from the cleaner so far had been like a strike against the boss's wall of arrogance. But everyone knew it wasn't enough yet. The real test was only starting. The boss paced in circles, his leather shoes snapping dryly on the polished floor. He drew deep breaths, trying to hold on to his air of superiority, but the tight set of his jaw gave away the pressure he felt. "Very well," he said, spinning suddenly toward her. "You want to prove you know? Then let's do this properly." He pulled the main file back into his hands and flipped through quickly, stopping on a section packed with tables, jargon, and footnotes in another language. He slammed it on the desk, like a judge with a gavel. "Translate this part. No easy lines here, no room for cheap tricks." The cleaner stepped closer to the desk. She adjusted her glasses gently, laid her fingers on the page, and began to read in silence. The room grew so quiet you could hear the ticking clock on the wall. After a few seconds, she lifted her eyes. "According to the guidelines set by the International Committee, all resources must be audited every quarter, following rules of transparency and accountability." She turned the page and went on without pause. "Any irregularity must be reported to the proper authorities within 30 days, under risk of administrative and criminal penalties." The intern's face lit up in awe. The bespectacled analyst pulled his glasses off to wipe them, just to hide his surprise. The secretary, who had failed before, whispered, "She hasn't missed a single word." The boss tried to break the tension with sarcasm. Fancy words. But do you even know what they mean? Translating is easy when you just repeat. The cleaner raised her eyes calmly. Do you want me to explain? He arched an eyebrow, mocking. Explain, then. She pointed at the paragraph. This is about regular audits carried out by outside groups to make sure nothing goes missing. It means reports alone aren't enough. You have to prove the numbers are real. The staff exchanged looks. The detail in her explanation was so sharp that no doubt remained. She wasn't repeating by memory. She was understanding. The boss cleared his throat uneasy. Anyone could guess that. But his words rang weak, and everyone felt it. The cleaner flipped through and stopped at another part, without being asked. Here, for instance, she said, tapping a footnote. They mention that failure to comply could bring fines higher than the value of the operations themselves. It's not in the main body, only in a note, but it's crucial. The effect was instant. Even the skeptics began staring at the boss with doubt. He no longer held the room. Trying to claw back control, the boss grabbed another sheet from his folder, a report written in German. Then translate this. She took it, read for a few seconds, and translated with ease. The planning must take into account the gradual reduction of subsidies, giving priority to sectors with greater ability for technological innovation. She paused and added, that means they want to cut spending in areas that bring no return and invest only where real growth comes. This time there wasn't awkward silence. There was a ripple of admiration. The intern couldn't resist and began clapping, but stopped when he realized no one joined in. The boss, furious, snapped at him. Be quiet! The boy shrank in his chair, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen it. The balance of respect had already shifted toward the cleaner. She closed the file slowly and said, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm just showing that knowledge doesn't depend on a title, a suit, or a position. The words cut deep. The boss stood still, breathing heavy. You think this makes you better than me? He asked, voice low but dripping with venom. No, she answered, steady. It only proves no one should be judged by looks. Her lines were simple, yet carried a force he couldn't fight. The secretary, who had always borne his sarcasm, muttered under her breath, She's saying what we all always wanted to. The boss heard. He turned to her at once, eyes burning. Do you want to lose your job? But this time the threat didn't land the same. She flinched, yes, but other employees began raising their heads. It was no longer just the cleaner standing up. The whole space was shifting, piece by piece. The cleaner took one step forward, holding the file against her chest. You challenged me, and I proved it. The boss bit his lower lip. He was surrounded. The game he had once ruled was now led by the woman he had never noticed. And at that moment, before them all, the proof was clear. She wasn't just capable. She was better than anyone they had expected. The room stayed silent, but it was a different silence. Not fear anymore, respect. And the boss knew. From that point on, nothing would be the same. The whole hall seemed to lean toward the cleaner. Even the hum of the air conditioner had turned into background noise for what everyone truly wanted to hear. The calm voice of the woman no one had seen before. The boss knew it, and he hated it. His eyes burned with bottled rage. Pride, once his shield, now weighed him down. He couldn't afford to lose to her, not in front of the entire team. He drew a long breath, ran a hand through his hair, and smiled. But it wasn't a smile of confidence. It was the smile of someone hiding poison. Very well, he said in a heavy tone. You passed easy tests, basic translations, simple paragraphs. But now we raise the bar. Let's see how far this so-called wisdom goes. He went to his desk drawer and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He tore it open in front of everyone and pulled out a stack of papers written in different languages, filled with acronyms, legal jargon, and technical terms. Here's a report from an international conference. It's complex, full of traps. Even my top analysts couldn't translate it on the spot. He threw the papers onto the desk with drama. If you can translate this, then maybe I'll start to believe. A murmur spread. The staff knew this document was no game. Even those rooting for the cleaner thought this might be too much. She, however, stepped forward calmly, as if nothing had changed. She picked up the first page, fixed her glasses, and began to read. The boss crossed his arms, waiting for her to stumble. According to the resolution passed at the last Congress, the signatory countries must align their export practices with global environmental standards, cutting carbon emissions by 20% by 2030. She lifted her head. It's clear. It's a demand to match foreign trade with sustainability goals. The shock was instant. The staff not only heard the words, but understood the meaning. With every line, it became clearer. She wasn't just translating. She was explaining, putting it into context. The boss clenched his teeth. "That's still easy," he barked. "Let's see this part." He pointed to another passage full of acronyms and international law terms. "Translate." She read for a moment and said, "Any breach of the established rules will lead to international arbitration, to be judged under Article 15 of the Vienna Convention on Multilateral Contracts." She paused and added, "In other words, if a country breaks the rules, it goes to an international court." The intern blurted out, "My God," she even explains the article. Some staff smiled discreetly, others shook their heads in disbelief. The boss slammed the desk with his hand, furious. "You're all blind. Don't you see? She's making it up." But the opposite happened. The more he shouted, the weaker he sounded. The cleaner turned another page and carried on without being asked. Financial incentives will be distributed based on meeting the targets, with priority to developing countries that present clear and verifiable reports. Silence. The boss, short of breath, wiped his face. Sweat gleamed on his forehead. He couldn't stop. If he did, it would mean admitting defeat. "Fine," he said, almost hysterical. "You want proof? Then prove you're not just repeating. Explain this chart." He pointed to a table filled with numbers, percentages, and acronyms in another language. She studied it briefly. "This chart shows the projected GDP growth in countries adopting clean energy policies. The highest number shows that in 5 years, the green economy could outperform traditional sectors." She traced a line with her finger. "Here, for example, it shows that countries investing in renewable energy will see a 12% rise in exports." The employee's eyes lit up. It was like watching a teacher in front of a class, except the teacher was the cleaner, and the students were the ones who once thought themselves above her. The boss couldn't take it anymore. "This proves nothing!" he shouted. "You could have memorized the report." But his voice was breaking, desperate. The secretary, always submissive before, lifted her head and spoke quietly but firm. "Nobody memorizes this." The whole room heard. The impact was crushing. It was the first time someone openly stood against him. He glared at her but realized it no longer worked. His threats didn't bite anymore. The cleaner stepped forward. "I don't need you to believe me. The document speaks for itself." She raised the pages high for all to see. "What matters isn't who translates. What matters is that everyone understands the content." Her words echoed through the hall like revelation. The boss, cornered, tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "You think this is victory? You think she's won because she spits out a few fancy words?" The intern raised his voice with sudden courage. "Not a few words, sir. She's explained more than anyone here ever could." The boss froze. The staff was starting to turn on him. The cleaner breathed deeply and ended. "I took the challenge because I can't stand seeing knowledge used as a weapon to humiliate. You tested me, and I showed what I know. If you still want to resist, that's your problem." Absolute silence. The boss's wall of arrogance was crumbling. Every trap he set, she turned into strength, and the team, who once feared him, now saw him clearly. A desperate man trying to block the inevitable. And everyone realized the cleaner wasn't just winning. She was shifting the balance of power inside that office. The air felt heavy, almost solid, thick enough to slice. No one moved. No one dared to cough, shuffle papers, or mask the tension. Everything hung between the boss's wounded pride and the cleaner's steady calm. The boss paced back and forth, his shiny shoes striking the polished floor like hammers. He tried to look in control, but sweat was already slipping down his forehead. Every tug at his tie, every brush of his sleeve gave away his nerves. He stopped in front of her, eyes narrowed. "Very well," he said, voice deep, trying to sound firm. "You think you've won? Just because you managed to read a few neat lines, you think you can silence me?" The cleaner stood still. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than any reply. The employees, who just days before had laughed at the boss's jokes, now looked at her with quiet respect. The intern seemed ready to burst with pride for her. The secretary, holding back tears, clasped her hands tightly on her lap. The boss raised the stack of papers. "Then translate the rest, here, now, in front of everyone." She took the file. Her fingers were steady. She adjusted her glasses and skimmed the pages. Reading came naturally, as though she were reviewing something already familiar. And she began. "All signed contracts must include transparency clauses, subject to audits by independent international bodies." She turned the page. "Reports must be submitted on a regular schedule, with supporting documents, under penalty of losing benefits immediately." Her voice rang clear, steady, no rush, no hesitation. It was as if each word carried the weight of justice. The staff were entranced. Every line she translated was like a brick pulled from the wall the boss had built for years, with arrogance and humiliation. She went on. "Penalties for non-compliance include fines proportional to the contract's total value and exclusion from future partnerships." The intern whispered to a co-worker, "She doesn't just translate, she explains." The cleaner, indeed, often looked up to clarify technical terms. "This, for example, means the company can be banned from the program if it fails. It's not just a fine. It's the end of the deal." The employees traded glances, amazed. The boss, red with anger, tried to cut in. "This proves nothing. You could have memorized the document earlier." She answered calmly, "You just pulled this report from your drawer. How could I have memorized it?" The hit was direct. Her words stripped away any defense. The boss started to lose his breath. "You're all blind, falling for the cheap trick of a woman who scrubs floors." The line echoed, but it didn't land. A few employees shook their heads. Others, once timid, now lifted their chins firmly. The secretary, who had always swallowed insults, raised her voice. "Nobody invents this out of nowhere." "She's right." The boss spun on her, furious. "Want to lose your job?" But this time the threat fell flat. On the contrary, the intern raised his voice. "If losing my job means standing with the truth, then so be it." A shock swept the room. For the first time, someone faced him head-on. The cleaner spoke again, serene. "I'm not here to take anything from anyone. I only proved that knowledge doesn't wear a uniform." Her words struck deep. The weight of truth was undeniable. The boss began to laugh, but it was nervous, almost broken. "And what are you clapping for? You think she's a hero? This is just luck." But the room no longer believed him. The intern started clapping, shy at first, soon joined by the secretary. Then an analyst. Within seconds, the whole hall erupted in applause. The sound filled the space, loud, strong, overwhelming. The boss raised his hand, trying to stop it. "Enough! Quiet!" No one listened. The clapping grew, wave after wave, until his face flushed with rage and shame. The cleaner lowered her eyes, emotional, but stood steady. She let the sound speak for her. When the applause finally eased, she handed back the file. "You said you'd give your paycheck to whoever translated it all." "I did." The line was simple, but it landed like a verdict. The boss froze, staring at her. Behind him, the staff stood silent, waiting. The secretary confirmed. "We all saw." The intern added, "And she did far better than any of us could." The boss rubbed his face, trying to compose himself. "You really think I'll hand over my full paycheck? You've lost your minds." But no one reacted. There was no crowd left for his act. The cleaner spoke with the calm voice that now filled the hall. "This isn't about money. It's about respect." The strike was direct. The staff murmured in agreement. The bespectacled analyst said firmly, "We spent years taking your insults. Today, someone proved you don't need a suit to have worth. The boss's eyes widened. He hadn't expected such defiance. But the wall had fallen. The employees were no longer submissive spectators. Now they were witnesses to a historic defeat. The boss, voice shaking, muttered, "You're all ungrateful." He turned his back, walked to his private office, and slammed the door hard. The noise echoed, but no one flinched. On the contrary, it sounded like the closing of a cycle. The cleaner breathed deeply. She set the papers on the desk and fixed her glasses. She returned to the broom, leaning in the corner, but to everyone there, she was no longer the same, no longer invisible. She was the woman who silenced the millionaire boss in front of them all. The staff approached her. The secretary, eyes wet, said, "You have no idea how much this meant to us." The intern added, "Today we saw what real courage looks like." The cleaner smiled shyly, but said nothing. Her silence proved she didn't need applause or speeches. What she wanted, she had already earned: respect. And everyone knew they would never forget that day. The slam of the door still rattled the glass when silence filled the floor. But it wasn't the old silence of fear, the one that stiffens the neck and makes eyes look away. It was different, thick, breathable, almost warm. A silence that left room for relief, for surprise, for the question, did this really happen? For a few seconds, no one moved. Then a keyboard began typing again, slowly. Another screen locked, not in panic, out of habit. Life rehearsed a return, only now under a new light. At the center of it all, the cleaner held the broom like a walking stick at the end of a long climb. The wooden handle, worn in her hands, seemed different, not in shape, but in meaning. The older secretary was the first to step up. Her hands still shook a little, her smile timid, her gaze damp. "You gave us air today," she spoke softly, like repaying a debt she couldn't measure. The cleaner raised her eyes, surprised. "I just couldn't stay quiet." Courage started there," the secretary answered, exhaling like shedding a heavy coat from her shoulders. The intern came right after, stumbling over words. "I've never seen anything like that. When you started explaining, it was like the room opened a window. He stopped, afraid of saying too much, and finished simply, "Thank you." Others came slowly. Analysts, designers, finance folks. No speeches, just presence. A light touch on the arm. A whispered, "Well done." A quiet, "We needed this," that felt like confession. Their looks were new, no longer passing through her as before. They landed on her, recognized her, returned respect. On the other side of the frosted glass, the boss paced his office, tie undone, jacket on the chair, hands pressed to the desk, then through his hair, then shoved in his pockets. His reflection, warped on the cabinet surface, looked like it was laughing. His stomach tightened. It wasn't only about the promised money, it was the cracked mirror of the image he had built, and worse, no clever line could cover it. In the hallway, someone started the coffee maker. The smell of fresh brew spread an unexpected comfort. The secretary offered a cup to the cleaner. "Want some?" She hesitated. "Yes, I do." They sat side by side at a counter almost never used. The mugs made a soft sound on the wood. The intern stood nearby, leaning, not daring to leave. "He'll come back later," an analyst said, without bitterness, just stating. "He can come back," the cleaner replied, blowing on the coffee. "The ones who return different are us." The line hung in the air like a ribbon stuck to the wall. The team looked at her, some nodding. For the first time, that office spoke of us without sounding like a slogan. A phone buzzed, short alerts in the group chat. "Did you see? It really happened." She translated everything and explained. "I've got chills." On another screen, a meeting reminder turned from red to grey. Someone postponed. Someone exhaled. In the corner, two plants once only decoration now looked like witnesses. The late morning light cut through the tall glass, casting rectangles on the floor. Inside them, dust floated, sparkling like small constellations. The cleaner smiled to herself. Dust stars. "Even what we sweep can look beautiful," she thought, half embarrassed by her own poetry. "You studied on your own, didn't you?" the secretary asked, careful not to pry. On the bus, on breaks, late at night. She shrugged. A used book doesn't complain about the hour. The intern chuckled softly. And it teaches without belittling. Behind the door, the boss took a deep breath, opened an email, wrote 3 lines and erased them, tried a cold statement. It sounded silly. Tried a scolding. It sounded weak. Tried an apology. It sounded impossible. He chose nothing. Closed the laptop. The wall clock ticked too loudly. In the open space, the talk turned into decision. An analyst with glasses, usually silent, spoke. We could set up a study rotation, 20 minutes a day. Whoever knows something teaches the rest. Could be language, spreadsheets, presentations, or a shared shelf, suggested the secretary. Each brings a book that changed something in them. And what if the promised paycheck became this? The intern risked, glancing at the cleaner. Not to shame anyone, but to start the library. She drew a breath. I don't want his money. I don't need that to prove anything. But a shelf, she smiled faintly. A shelf is beautiful. The idea spread with the excitement of the first days of a project that works. Someone opened a shared document called Shelf. Another added tabs, donations, languages, tutoring. A designer suggested a small poster, knowledge doesn't need a badge. The intern clapped without realizing it. Laughter followed. This time, it wasn't hidden. Suddenly, the boss's door opened. He stood in the doorway. The room froze from old habit, but a second later it breathed again. The boss scanned the faces. He didn't find the fear he was used to. He found people. And the cleaner in the middle, broom resting nearby, coffee mug in hand. He cleared his throat. We need to get back on track. His voice broke. We'll talk about... He never finished. No word matched what he wanted to recover. The cleaner felt a sting in her chest, not pity, but raw truth. She stood. May I say something? He hesitated, ready to deny, but answered. Say it. You're good at what you do. She held the cup with both hands, as if holding a request carefully. But you confuse demanding with attacking. We learn when we're challenged, not when we're put down. You don't need to yell to be heard. There was no poison, only clarity. The boss breathed through his mouth, stared at the floor, then the glass, then her. Understood. That was all he managed. He stepped back and closed the door gently for the first time that day. The room sighed, not in fear, but in closure. A circle had ended without noise. The morning moved on. Tasks picked up again. Only now an invisible tag clung to every screen. Speak with respect. The secretary answered a client with patience that wasn't forced. An analyst asked another for help without fear of looking weak. The designer printed the draft poster and taped it quietly to a corner. Knowledge doesn't need a badge. The cleaner went back to her work, not out of indifference, but routine, changing the trash bag, straightening chairs, polishing steel. Each act held the same care as always, but without the weight of being unseen. Wherever she passed, someone lifted their eyes and said, "Good morning, Maria." Her name finally had sound. At lunch, she sat in a corner with her container. Before opening it, the secretary pulled up a chair. "May I?" Of course. 2 more joined, then 3. The table, once hers alone, filled. The talk wasn't about the boss. It was life. Who lives far? Who studies at night? Who teaches their mother how to use a phone? Who dreams of traveling? They learned the cleaner knew no-knead bread recipes, and the intern played guitar on weekends. They laughed out loud. This time, no one had to apologize. In the afternoon, the internal email came short, signed by management. A respectful environment is non-negotiable. The company will adopt training practices and anonymous feedback channels. We thank those who remind us of what matters. No names mentioned, none needed. The meaning was clear. Back at his desk, the intern posted in the group, "Stopped at the public library, bringing 3 books tomorrow." The secretary replied with a heart. The analyst shared a list of beginner language titles. Someone asked, "What if we don't have books?" Answer, "Bring a story, bring a question, bring willingness." At day's end, the cleaner folded the cloths neatly, checked her mental list. Before leaving, she stopped by the fresh poster, read it again, smiled. That phrase didn't lift her alone. It raised everyone. In the hall, she crossed paths with the boss. He walked without followers, without rush, without that air of owning the air. He stopped, unsure how to begin. "About today," he tried. She spared him the awkwardness. "It's over." He breathed. "I won't forget. You don't need to. Remembering is what changes next time." He nodded, small but whole, walked away. So did she. Two parallel paths that for a moment recognized each other. At the bus stop, the evening wind tugged loose strands of hair. The city hummed its usual noise. Horns, calls, laughter, footsteps. The cleaner pulled a worn book from her bag, opened at a page marked with an old receipt, and read 2 lines. She smiled to herself. "A used book never complains about time," she repeated inwardly, and her smile widened. The bus stopped. She boarded, found a seat by the window. Next to her, a schoolgirl whispered homework lines. The cleaner leaned in, gently pointed at a missing accent, explained without correcting, taught without belittling. The girl whispered thanks, happy. The bus rolled. The city slipped by. In the office, lights went dark row by row. On the wall, the poster seemed to glow. "Knowledge doesn't need a badge." On a desk, a note with 4 signatures read, "Tomorrow we'll bring the shelves." In another corner, a box already labeled "Donations, dictionaries, grammars, novels, whatever comes." No statues, no plaques, no speeches, just a day that ended differently. And because of that, promised to begin differently too. As the bus crossed the bridge, the sky turned copper. The cleaner rested her forehead on the cold glass, shut her eyes for a moment, and let the image return. The whole office clapping, not just for her, but for the truth that no one needs to step on another to be great. She opened her eyes. The reflection showed her own face, tired yet beautiful like any face that had survived the day. She got off 2 stops later, walked along the sidewalk where the houses all looked alike, greeted the neighbor at the green gate, turned the knob of her own door. Before stepping in, she thought of tomorrow, the shelf, the 20-minute lessons, the poster, the names spoken with respect, and softly, only for herself, "Let it stay this way. Let us not forget." She entered. The house smelled of soap and hope. Outside, night slipped in slowly, without knocking. Inside, the day ended whole. And in that faraway office, something had changed forever. Fear had given way to respect, and respect, once it arrives, never goes back into the drawer. The next morning dawned like any other, but inside that office nothing was the same. The desks were in the same spots, screens blinking with reports, meetings scheduled at the usual times. Yet there was something different in their eyes. People greeted each other with more ease, without the invisible weight of a boss, ready to mock at the smallest mistake. The air felt lighter, as if windows had been opened after years shut. On the wall, the improvised poster was still taped. "Knowledge doesn't need a badge." The plain letters, printed on an ordinary sheet, now felt like a motto. It wasn't decoration, it was memory. The cleaner arrived early, as always. Simple uniform, broom in hand, hair tied in a rushed bun. Nothing in her routine had changed, except how she was seen. As soon as she entered, the secretary gave her a genuine smile. "Good morning, Maria." The name sounded different. Not just a greeting, but recognition. Others repeated it, some with a nod, others out loud. She answered with a shy nod, surprised to hear her name spoken with such respect. As she swept, memories came back. Every detail, the arrogant promise, the humiliation disguised as challenge, the doubtful stares, the first claps, the door slammed in anger. It felt like she had lived a whole life in just a few hours. Across the hall, the boss came in later. No sharp footsteps, no loud slam of the glass door. He walked quickly to his office, not lifting his head to greet. People followed him with their eyes, but not with the old submission. Now they looked at him as just another man. His pedestal had crumbled. All morning he stayed shut inside, reviewing reports, answering calls, avoiding the open floor. He was a cornered man, still powerful, but no longer in control. At the coffee break, employees gathered around the new cardboard box, already filled with donated books. One brought an old dictionary, another a grammar, another a novel in English. Each book felt like a quiet statement. We choose to grow. The cleaner passed by with her broom, and the intern called out, "Maria, you need to add your book too." She laughed. "Mine is so worn the pages barely stay in place." "Then that's the one that counts the most," the secretary added. "Because it's already taught." She stood silent for a few seconds, thinking, then nodded. "I'll bring it tomorrow." The clock hit 11:30. An internal notice summoned everyone to a meeting, called by the boss himself. The floor traded uneasy looks. Was it the return of the old, harsh voice? But when he walked in, the air felt different. His jacket was sharp, as always, but his tired eyes showed something had shifted. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I have a few things to say." He paused, searching for the right words. "Yesterday we all saw a unusual scene." The room stayed quiet. "I admit that for years I confused demanding with harshness." He adjusted the papers in his hand, uneasy. "That doesn't mean I'll stop asking for results, but it also doesn't mean I need to humiliate." The room was stunned. It wasn't a clear apology, but it was the closest anyone had heard. He breathed deeply again. "From now on, we'll have a new learning routine. I want reports, yes, but I also want everyone to grow." He pointed to the box of books. "I heard you've already started something on your own." "I support it." A murmur ran through the room. No one believed they were hearing this. In the back, Maria watched silently, broom leaning on the wall. She didn't expect anything from him, but hearing those words felt like seeing a wall start to crack. The meeting ended with practical notes, but what remained wasn't about reports or targets. It was the feeling that an invisible line had been crossed, the line of respect. That afternoon, while emptying trash bins, Maria overheard one analyst whisper, "If she hadn't done what she did, we'd still be bowing our heads." Another replied, "Never thought I'd learn so much from someone I barely noticed." She smiled quietly. She didn't need more. At the end of the day, she passed by the box of books. Inside, next to grammars and manuals, there was a handwritten note, "For those who never give up on learning, thank you." No signature. She folded her cleaning cloth, turned off the light in one room, and headed out. The sunset poured gold through the glass hallway, bathing everything in light. She paused for a moment, staring at her own shadow stretched across the floor. For the first time, that shadow didn't seem smaller. Outside, the city throbbed. Crowded buses, horns, hurried people. Maria drew a deep breath, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and headed for the stop. As she walked, she felt the light weight of something that couldn't fit inside the bag: dignity. On the bus, she opened the worn book she had promised to donate. She read a few lines and smiled. Beside her, a teenager peeked curiously. She showed him the page and explained a sentence. He thanked her shyly. Once again, she was teaching without trying to be a teacher, simply sharing what she knew. And there was the lesson. It wasn't about money or status or titles. It was about seeing that true worth isn't in what you show off, but in what you carry within. Back at the office, everyone knew the moment would be remembered for a long time. Not as the day the cleaner translated a contract, but as the day she silenced the boss. And more than that, the day she proved knowledge can come from anywhere, and no one should be underestimated for the job they do. The moral stayed etched like an unseen mark. Whoever uses power to belittle will one day be defeated by the simple act of someone speaking truth calmly. Maria asked for nothing, demanded nothing, sought no praise. She only showed that greatness makes no noise. And as she walked out of the office doors, she left behind not just a clean floor, but a trail of respect no one would dare to erase.